It's better than the hey.
I can't do the hey. Hey. I like doing the hey thing when I walk into a room, Hey. I think it's nice. But I can't do it anymore.
No.
Times have changed. She's not trying to change me. She's trying to improve me.
Yes. He's a work in progress.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Studio Steve, and I'm here with the lovely Veronica.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
This is part 2 of our storytelling focus here. This is the power of storytelling in podcasting, continued from last week.
And for those of you who are tuning in the first time, we are the Pod Sound School. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, content creators, and podcasters to plan, develop, launch, and promote a successful podcast. A high-quality, successful podcast.
Yes. So
if you need our services, you know where to find us.
Yeah. You can find us at podsoundschool.com. You can also find Veronica over on Instagram.
Yeah.
Veronica's your Instagram person, and I'm your Twitter guy.
Yes.
That's actually the quickest way to get a hold of either one of us is through Twitter or Instagram.
Which is very funny because we just gravitated towards different social media platforms.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't stand Instagram.
And I can't stand Twitter.
I
don't get it.
I have little mini Instagram panic attacks.
Yes.
I really do.
And they're pretty funny. They're pretty hilarious.
I don't think they're funny at all. They're painful. So in the spirit of storytelling, Veronica, I wanted to ask you, how in the hell in tarnation did we get here? What in the world has brought us to this moment here on Twitter Live, here making podcasting? I mean, did you ever think at any time in your life that you were going to wind up, being a podcast coach or podcast consultant and a podcaster?
Not in a million years, no. I started listening to podcasts back in law school. And I became obsessed with Serial and Snap Judgement. We're going to be talking about Snap Judgement today on our episode. I'm excited because it's a storytelling podcast, one of my favorite storytelling podcasts. But, from listening to podcasts to being a podcast producer and a podcast coach, I've never thought that I would do that in my career. But I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah.
You never know, right?
Yeah, and I'm the same way, from my musical background and, having from the time I can remember, I just loved playing with electronic signals and taking cables out of VCRs and manipulating tape and stuff. But I never thought that life would bring me here into podcasting, but it's really
because you wanted to be a rock star, right?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to be a rock star.
Well, you were in a band.
Yeah, and I didn't. It's not that I wanted to be a rock star. It's just that was.
You wanted to be like Kurt Cobain.
Well,
let's be honest.
I had what I call the Kurt Cobain complex, but that was just sort of society's misdirected thing that you're supposed to do if you have musical abilities. It's like, well, okay, go record an album, go on tour, and that's what you should do, But life just has other plans for you. And then I have to say, all of this, the reason we're here, the reason I ask you that question is because it's your fault. Because
I think this is a good time to tell people our why.
Yeah, our why. Okay, well, what is our why?
I thought you were leading
into that. I know, but I had that in mind, and I just kind of like to hear what your version of our why is.
Okay, well, I think everything started with producing a podcast for your mom.
Oh yes, that was
the story
what I was
of Sandra Marie.
Yeah, and so that's where it all started.
So he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't shut up about his mom, Sandra, her story, because she has a very interesting story with the LDS church and her being a lesbian
and going through conversion therapy.
And it's such a powerful story. So one night I told him, well, why don't you guys make a podcast out of that story?
Yeah. And seeing that was Veronica's idea. And that's just kind of what started the whole thing. I was doing podcasts before that, but this one was really where it sort of sparked a nerve.
Because he was healing, right?
It was a very healing
process. There were a lot of tears and a lot of closure and a lot of
closure. It was very cathartic. It was good for everyone. It was good for my mother and it was good for me as well. So, and most specifically, what it was good for is it introduced us to the welcoming spirit of the podcasting world.
And then in how powerful a podcast can be.
Yeah, and then we wanted to get into doing other podcasts once we finished that podcast, and we talked about doing the Stories from the Red Chair podcast, which never came to fruition.
We just wanted to have a platform for people to come and tell us their stories. Yeah.
And then it got
we wanted to have family members interviewing them, so it would be more emotional and more healing.
And what we knew for sure is that we wanted to give back to the podcast community.
Yes.
So that's when we developed, I realized that as you know, my abilities all these years as an audio engineer working in recording studios and everything, I knew that the one thing I could really help is to improve audio quality. And so that's why the Pod Sound School was born, because I knew I could help podcasters get better audio quality on their podcasts very easily and cost effectively.
Yes. And I got to say that I knew you were talented before working with you, but you just blow my mind every single day. You are so talented.
Thank you. I appreciate
you
that.
You are very talented.
Yeah. And likewise, you know, I had no idea you had these gifts of writing.
Me neither.
And storytelling yourself, and to see you come out of the corporate world and get into the world of, you know, of storytelling and to share and to helping people share their own stories. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
Really exciting journey.
Yeah. I was just very unfulfilled in my career. You know, that there was nothing more for me than doing what I went to school for, which was law. And I still feel very passionate about law because I feel like that was my calling to help other people.
Yeah.
But I'm here and I'm helping other people as well to have a voice.
Yeah, to have a voice for just any number of subjects. And that's what's...
Yes, and they can have their podcast, and they can have their podcast well-produced, high quality.
And that's what's so interesting about this process, though, is now out of not only our need and our desires and our why, which is to help other people tell their stories, help other people express themselves. Now we're being pulled into just directions that we didn't realize. And our business is taking all new shapes and forms. And, and now we've, not only are we helping people with the audio quality, but now we're doing social media. We have clients we're working one-on-one with their podcasts.
Yeah, we're learning about marketing.
And then we're opening a podcast editing division into our company as well, too, which is really fun. And that's just sort of our story real quick of how we came from being total outsiders to podcasting to becoming now podcast coaches and consultants.
We're growing our community.
And we're growing our community. And, you know, and that is what we're trying to do here. And so we just would love it. We know that from our analytics of this podcast, that there's a lot of listeners that we haven't heard from yet. And we would love to hear from you. We'd love for you to join us in our quest for getting better at this podcasting thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're constantly doing research. We're obsessed with it. We're investing a lot of money and time into online courses. We want to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you so that you can get to your goals quicker and more efficiently without the headache and the struggle that it takes to get there, because so often we're flying in the dark. I mean, we're constantly flying in the dark, and anytime we meet a new mentor or we find a new online course, we're like, I can't believe we didn't know that.
We didn't know about you,
we didn't know about you, and we didn't know that it was so easy to do this one thing or this other thing. So come join us on and let us know how your podcast is going, especially if you have a podcast that you're planning a launch for, or any struggles that you're having, like,
or you have the idea of having a podcast, but you haven't made that decision yet.
Yeah, you haven't made the decision yet, or
Talk
whatever.
to
Like,
us.
we would love to talk to you. And again, find Veronica over on Instagram at Pod Sound School. Find me on Twitter at Pod Sound School as well. Or you can always email me, studiosteve@podsoundschool.com. And with that, why don't we get into the episode? Okay, so on today's episode, we are going to continue talking about storytelling. And first, we're going to talk about the 3-act story structure, the hero's journey. Try to keep that quick. And then we're going to share some tips from Julia DeWitt and Anna Sussman, who are the senior producers of NPR Snap Judgement, like Veronica talked about. Just some quick tips from them about storytelling. And then also some tips from Jamie Jensen, who we just discovered and have fallen in love with. She's an award-winning screenwriter, copywriter, ghostwriter. She's also the creator of something called the Story School, which is really cool. And she also has a really sweet podcast called Creatives Making Money, which is a really...
So she's a Podski.
Yeah, she's a fellow Podski. Then finally, we'll sort of finish up by talking about how we can utilize all of these storytelling techniques in our own podcasts, regardless of the genre. And
so stick until the end, because this information is so valuable.
Yeah, make sure you stick around till the end. And, you know, obviously, audio dramas and narrative type podcasts are directly telling stories. But what about the non-narrative podcasts? Like, what about...
Like our podcast.
Like our podcast, informational, educational podcasts, or health and fitness, or financial podcasts, informative podcasts, or educational podcasts. And so we're going to talk about it. At the end, we'll wrap up by sharing some light on what we've learned so far about how you can utilize all these really cool storytelling techniques to get more engagement, to grab people's attention. There's so much noise out there. And then also to hold their attention once you grab it and to make long-lasting human connections. So, yeah, there we go. The hero's journey, or the 3-act story structure. Now, this is something that is very familiar to all of us, even if we don't know the details of it. You know, the 3-act structure, it's like, you know, the first act, the second act, and the third act. You think about that term obviously came from plays, and we usually had an intermission in the middle of Act 2 at when the tension or the turning point in the story happens. That was like right where there'd be a nice cliffhanger. Then we would go and have some refreshments and come back and watch the last hour of the play. And so that then is called the hero's journey, and it's all about this archetype of the hero. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about the hero. And I mentioned the app Contour. It's a really cool app when it comes to screenwriting. And I know we're not screenwriters, we're podcasters, but it's amazing how you can utilize these screenwriting techniques and turn them around to put into your business, your podcast, any kind of content that you can put these tips into. So I really love the Contour app because they help you to write your own screenplay, and in it they describe, and I'm going to be kind of just reading from the app a little bit, what is your hero or who is your hero. And the hero is obviously the main character of your story, and the whole idea is that your hero should be sympathetic. The audience needs to care about who your hero is so they become more invested in the outcome of the story. So you can use a couple techniques to make your hero more sympathetic, and one thing term that they say in screenwriting is petting the dog. If your character has undeserved misfortune, if she has been the victim of circumstances beyond her control, maybe an unfaithful spouse or abandonment or the death of a loved one or the loss of a job, all of these can quickly get the audience onto your hero's side. And then showing your hero petting the dog, what that means is showing her or him being nice to animals or kids or old people. And conversely, if you want to quickly show your hero's main antagonist as unsympathetic, you would show them being nasty to animals or kids or old people. And that brings us to the most common archetype in storytelling, which is the orphan. Every story is really about change. It's about watching somebody go through change or answering a big looming question. And so our characters usually start off as an orphan. And they're either going to be an orphan literally or they'll be one figuratively. And this is crazy, and I never really thought about it until I started looking into this, how every movie, every play, most of them, a good portion of them are actually orphans.
And let me tell you, it's a pain. He ruins every single movie. We can't watch me or the twins can watch any movie without him ruining it for us.
Well, you know, they
Isn't
need
that
to
true?
know. They need to be informed.
And we get so mad. Here he comes again. He's going to ruin another movie.
It's important that they understand these things, you know? And let's just think about this for a minute with the orphan archetype. You've got Romeo from Romeo and Juliet, Oliver Twist, Annie, Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, Jack from Titanic, Luke and Anakin Skywalker, and also Finn from Star Wars, Frodo Baggins, Batman, Superman, Harry Potter, Will Hunting, Cinderella, The Godfather, Hannibal Lecter, Tom Sawyer, and Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones. I mean, the list is just, it's insane. It's like, okay, yes, they're orphans, right? They have this undeserved misfortune. A lot of times we watch their parents die on screen, like Bambi. You know, so if they're not an orphan and they're just a figurative orphan, they're isolated from society. And that's important because, and so Act 1 is all about establishing this orphanage. And then we go into Act 2, and this is where, according to Contour, he calls it the wanderer archetype. And the wanderer archetype is the first half of Act 2. And in Act 2, our hero changes from an orphan and becomes a wanderer. And
There's a transformation.
They have a transformation.
That happens gradually.
But it starts happening at something called an inciting incident that we talked about in our last episode. And it happens gradually, and then our hero starts striving to find the answer to what he calls a central question, which reminds me of Lajos Egri. And Lajos Egri had this book, The Art of Dramatic Writing. He's it's amazing, and that's more about writing scripts for stage, not for screenplays. But he is obsessed in that book with this idea of the premise. He says that all the good stories that there are really have a strong premise or a strong message. And it's sort of this underlying message of what a story is really all about. Like, and if you think about...
Like love conquers all.
Love conquers all. Or if you think about, for example, Titanic and Romeo and Juliet pretty much have the same premise, which is love conquers even death. A little quote here a couple quotes from Laho Sagri that are fun about premise. He says, everything has a purpose or premise. Every second of our life has its own premise, whether or not we are conscious of it at the time. The premise may be as simple as breathing or as complex as a vital emotional decision, but it's always there. And so when he's talking about the process of writing, and people are like, well, he says, no, you don't need to have the premise in mind when you're writing or when you start writing. You can start with a character or an incident or even just a simple thought. But as that thought grows or the incident grows and the story slowly unfolds itself, you have time to find your premise in the mass of your material, and the important thing is to just find it. And then also he talks about how you don't ever really say out loud the premise in your play, or he says, although you should never mention your premise in the dialogue of your play, the audience must know what the message is, and whatever the message is, you must prove it. So the whole idea of the premise and the central question is something that we're asking. And in a lot of stories, that is, am I capable of doing this? Can the character do this? And I think that's why we relate to these struggling heroes so much, is because we just want them to finally stand up to their shitty boss, We want them to finally overcome these things, these pain points that we relate to. And we can relate to feeling like the underdog. We can relate to feeling like we're isolated from society. And we want the sympathetic character to rise above, or to answer the central question they have. Will love conquer everything? Will that dad who's too obsessed with his career finally realize that family is more important than career, and overambition leads to, losing family and relationships and things like that.
And
right?
I think that's why I struggle so much with indie movies sometimes, because some of them don't follow this pattern.
That structure intentionally, so they don't follow that structure.
So they're like, they end, and you're like, you kind of don't know what.
There's no rising action.
There's no rising action. There's no resolution. It just leave you with a lot of anxiety.
It's like a
psychological
experiment.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Oh, you remember that movie with Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman?
Oh, that was a wonderful movie, though. Something about the goat, or killing the goat. I don't know what it was.
Gosh.
But when Colin Farrell goes off about the pubes, pubes? We need more pubes. Pubes.
That movie was a painful experience.
Are there pubes in the cupboard?
I couldn't even finish it because I could see it. I could feel it. It was just messing up with my psyche.
Oh.
No, thank you. But anyway.
We digress.
Yes.
So the Wanderer, right? So basically what this means is he or she, our character, goes from being an orphan to now this enticing incident happened that makes them aware of the central question. And then they start to gain tools and skills, and they run into opponents and helpers along their path to prove the central question, essentially. And then from the Wanderer, they turn into the Warrior, which is now where the stakes get higher and higher. And it's kind of the series of yeses and nos. It's like they're met with really strong opposition, and then they get a yes. They get something. Somebody comes along and says, here, I'll help you with this. They get a secret. They get something that progresses them. And then they get hit even harder. And then the second half of Act 2 is all about that. And they have to become a warrior. They have to become even stronger, faced with harder and harder opposition, until they eventually come to the final point of Act 2, which is usually the line of demarcation between Act 2 and Act 3, which is when they become a martyr. And what's really interesting here is, just like the archetype of orphans in a lot of the best stories ever told, they actually physically become a martyr. And here's what Contour app has to say about martyrdom. The answer to this central question, the martyr archetype, the hero must be willing to die, irrevocably becoming a martyr. Only by a willingness to lose it all can he win it all. And so taking on the martyr archetype, the hero is no longer motivated by the possibility of success. Instead, he is solely driven by the desire to do what is right or necessary, no matter the consequences. Once he gives up the thought of winning, embracing the transition from warrior to martyr, fate or nature or God rewards him by giving him what he no longer hoped to get, which is success. And maybe if he's lucky, it's what he needed all along. The martyr can also be a character other than the hero. In this variation of the martyr archetype, the hero learns and is motivated by the martyr's example. So sometimes another character will die instead of the lead character, or other times the martyrdom or the death is more of a figurative one. It's more of a psychological one, and the old character they were is dead, and they have a new birth and a new transition. And then finally, to finish that off, I just want to read a little quote by Robert McKee himself. He talks about the same essential things that Lajos Agri talks about, this importance of premise, but also this importance of character and learning who character is. And he's really all about character. And he says that true character is revealed in the choices a human being makes under pressure. The greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation. The truer the choice to the character's essential nature. So that makes a lot of sense. And Veronica and I were talking about it earlier. It's like, when we learn most about people is when we see them in trying circumstances. Mm-hmm. When they're met with hostility or conflict or opposition, that's when their true character comes out. Mm-hmm. Are they going to shy away from it? Or are they going to explode with anger? Mm-hmm. So that's about it. And I know that, maybe that a lot of that doesn't seem relevant to your specific podcast, especially for our business podcasts out there, for our financial podcasts. But it really is relevant in a lot of ways, because understanding the 3-act structure is a good way to understand human emotions and why we're so drawn to the stories that we're drawn to.
And you need to understand these different archetypes so you can write your story accordingly.
Yeah. And
because this is what get people emotions out. This is what by getting emotions from your audience, by getting those emotions going, then that's how you're going to connect.
Yeah.
So besides having these 3 archetypes in mind, there's other things that you need to ask yourself in order for you to know if you have a good story. Mm-hmm. And this checklist is coming from Julia DeWitt and Anna Sussman, and there are the senior producers of NPR's Snap Judgement, like we already mentioned. So their checklist contains the following questions. Number 1, does it have an action? Does the story have an action? Does the story have a series of events? That's something you need to ask, because if there's no action, if there's no series of events, then you may be considered to get another story or move on from that one.
Yeah, it might be boring,
Might be boring, not very interesting. Then the question number 2 would be, does the story have tension?
Yes.
Does it have rising tension? Is it going to keep you at the edge of your seat? Is it going to keep you engaged and interested and willing to stick around to see how it resolves? And number 3, does it have a good talker? And this is very important, because there's so many people with good stories, but they don't have a way to say it in a manner that is enticing and that is appealing. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm imagining that all of you have that friend or family member who can tell stories like no other. And you're just like seeking for that moment and that family party, and, during the holidays, when this person is just going to tell us about their latest adventures. Or so there's some kind of a storytelling characteristic or a storytelling, skill
or charisma or something.
Charisma that this person needs to have. So it's a combination. Is it a good story, and is it a good storyteller? Mm-hmm. Both. Does it have compelling scenes? You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so with compelling scenes, it's like audio storytelling can actually be very visual.
Yeah.
And it's our job to use descriptive words to really bring people in, like a good book, like good literature does.
Yeah.
And just to create a visual environment for people. Mm-hmm. I think that's what that refers to.
Yeah. Something that I was thinking during this is like for somebody, let's say it's somebody who can tell the story that they crossed the border when they were a kid. Mm-hmm. I crossed the border from Mexico to United States when I was a kid. So setting the scene would be like, it was dark. We had to walk across the desert, or we had to cross the river, and I was scared. I was separated from my parents. Mm-hmm. So something like that would be.
Yeah, you describe the sound of the train.
The scene.
Or you could even bring smells into it.
Use
the senses. Use all 5 senses. Mm-hmm. Talk about how it sounded, what it, and then even with audio storytelling, storytelling, you can even include sound effects too.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Does it have an unexpected twist?
Ooh. That's a big one too. Like it's something totally unexpected, and that's such a powerful thing. The best stories all have twists,
Yes.
you know? And it's when they're kind of unexpected. You have this tension, this rising tension that's building, and you're really worried for the character.
Yeah. So for example, talking about this child who was separated from his parents during the journey of coming here to America, then he got here to America and he couldn't be united with his parents because he got lost. So that's an unexpected twist. We're waiting for him to be reunited with his family, but he gets lost.
Yeah.
So that would be an unexpected twist. I don't know if you can come up with a better
No, I think that's a great example. Yeah.
Okay, so then the question number 6 would be, does the story have stakes, something on the line? So in this case, the stake would be like crossing the border safely and meeting with the parents.
Yeah, getting killed. And that's the thing. What happens if the character, and this is what Lajos and Robert McKee are always talking about, what happens if the character doesn't succeed? That's the stakes, right?
Yeah.
What if they don't get what they want?
And what if they die through
and that's
the
the
journey?
highest stake, right, is death. And then they have to be willing to die.
Okay, let's finish this because I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Okay, number 7, does the story have an audience?
And
that's very important.
That's very important. And what's cool about that is with podcasting, and Anna Sussman was saying this in this course, is that there's an audience for virtually every topic. But the important thing is just identifying the audience. Make sure that there is an audience and you know where they are and you're telling the story for them.
Yeah, that you're telling stories that they want to hear. And number 8 is, do you love the story? That's a very important part of everything in life, I would say. Do you love it? Do you love this story?
Your passion for the story does all the work for you, really.
Yeah.
And then what was your question you were going to ask?
Well, my question is let's use the example of this kid crossing the border. You know what, if you were talking about the hero's journey and what happens when there's no happy endings, when let's say that unfortunately something goes bad and he dies throughout the journey and parents will never be reunited with their kid.
When it comes to storytelling, I think it's Aristotle that says the best stories are tragedies. And the most famous story, arguably, of all time is Romeo and Juliet. It's a tragedy. They both die at the end. And what happens by their death, though, their martyrdom brings
the families
together. It ends that war that was going on. Because of their tragedy. So, and in this story, that kid dying would be horrible because we're like, no, you can't kill the main character. And
but it would be like the family moving on and
it would
finding
be not
closure.
only the family moving on, but maybe it also had made some political changes. Maybe something happened within society because of it. Maybe he became some sort of martyr, and a martyr, he was kind of a legend in a way. And his story would be told forever because of something. And then it's great that he died in a way, and then he died for the cause that he was trying to prove. Now, lastly, before we finish up and talk about how all this relates to podcasts, why don't we talk about our Podski friend, Jamie Jensen. She's listed the 5 types of stories, and she helps to use these storytelling techniques. She's a screenwriter herself for businesses specifically, and this is cool because it's sort of getting us closer to how we can use this for podcasters.
Yeah, so these are steps that you can use, or forms of storytelling that you can use no matter the type of genre that your podcast
content, or medium or anything.
So we have the why story, aka the origin. So the origin of, it can be your business, it can be your product,
it can be your podcast,
the origin of your podcast, the origin of the idea of having a podcast. And basically what you do here is to tell your audience why you created your podcast, why you created your business, why you are an entrepreneur, the reason behind what you do. And then you give a background for your audience. Using the why too can appeal to the emotions of the audience. So you want to talk about the how?
Yeah. And so then the other type of story is the how story. She also calls this the here's how I accomplished X, or let me tell you about the time, those kind of stories. And this shows or teaches your process. So this is a really good type of story you can tell for educational content or for informative content.
Yeah.
Because you can
We try to do that a lot. And this is stuff that you can use on your website. This is stuff that you can use on your social media. This is stuff that you can use on your podcast, on your
you can
blog.
Use in speaking. It's everywhere.
So we've been using this on our Instagram stories. And I asked Steven to, walk me through the process of you animating the videos, or walk me through the process of you like manipulating the audio, and I make little clips for people to watch.
Yeah, so this is how we do what we do, and people really like that a lot. And this is very valuable because people love to tune in for
and they
the
like to
know-how,
learn,
and they like to listen to all the little tips and tricks. So that's number 2.
Yeah. Number 3 is the I've been there storytelling. And the I've been there is just it's a very powerful way to connect with your audience because it shows vulnerability. This is the mentor archetype, and often this will parallel or mirror their customer's story. Your experience has provided you with the tools you need to help them achieve their goal. So we were talking about the example of the fitness coach and how the fitness coach struggled with overweight, and the overweight brought other issues like depression and health issues, and that's why this person was inspired to get into the path of fitness and health, and how by telling their story, I've been there, I know your struggle getting out of bed, I know your struggle with meals, I know your struggle with your weight, with the motivation, because I've been there, I was there, and I was able to overcome all those obstacles. You can do it too. That's why I think that's the most powerful one, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
It is.
But it's powerful just because it appeals to empathy directly. And in our previous episode, we were talking about how you can use different tenses to tell stories. And this one is particularly good for the second person. When you're saying you're saying that you language. It's like, you've just been there. I know how that feels.
I know it sucks.
And then you're doing this, and then you can't get this to happen, and it sucks, and this is how it feels. That's a really good one. And then number 4 is, I know something you don't know. Or AKA, I have skills that you don't. I like this. And this is the expert archetype. This is a nice place where you can establish your expertise or education or experience. So this is less about the empathy, the previous one, and more about sympathy. You sympathize and you say, it sucks. I feel for you that you're going through what you're going through. I haven't gone through that, but I happen to be an expert at this, which will help you not to have to go through that pain.
I have the skills.
I have the skills so I can do this so that you don't have to.
So you don't struggle.
So you don't struggle, right? So that's great.
Yeah, let me handle that for you. Let me take that burden off your shoulders.
And this one's also good for authority building because it's a way that you can share your expertise in your education and stuff.
Yeah. And number 5 is the success story, aka case study. Success at achieving a desired goal highlights client or customer success and answers the question, is it possible for me?
Yeah, and this one I think is also very powerful and ties in with the I've been there, number 3. But this one's really cool. And this, back to our previous episode, we talked about third person. This is a really cool way to tell third person stories, is by including highlight stories from your clients or your customers or your podcast listeners. And that's it. And we really like that about Jamie Jensen. And again, with all of these people we've mentioned in this episode's description, we are going to include all of the links. Yeah, definitely go check it out. We've been really enjoying creativelive.com. It's online courses for a monthly subscription, or you can purchase courses just individually. So we'd recommend going to check those out too. They have really cool courses there and quite a few on podcasting. And anyhow, now let's quickly sum up. Anyhow. What, you don't like the way I say anyhow?
Hey.
Now, is the anyhow, if you just heard me say it, would it be as bad? Or is it the way that my face is that makes you
yeah.
Do you like it? Is that like a cutesy thing that you're making fun of it?
It's better than the hey.
I can't do the hey. Hey. I like doing the hey thing when I walk into a room, Hey. I think it's nice. But I can't do it anymore.
No.
Times have changed. She's not trying to change me. She's trying to improve me.
Yes. He's a work in progress.
Yeah, I'm a work in progress. So now let's just, quickly chat about how we can take all of this storytelling stuff and apply it to podcasts, because now it's like, okay.
Yeah, so let's give our podcasts some ideas.
Let's give some ideas. So first we brought up the idea of financial podcasts, right?
Yes.
So financial podcasts, I think it's like pretty easy, right? A good place to start is just to ask, what are the pain points of my customers? That's always a good place to reverse engineer your stories.
What are their fears? What are their struggles?
What are their struggles? And then how can I alleviate those struggles? And then you can just start picking stories. First, number one, why? Why are you here? Tell those stories like crazy. The other thing too is you can tell these multiple stories within the same podcast episode. So you can, little stories that make up kind of the grand story of your business or the grand story of what you're doing. And we keep saying business and marketing, and you might be thinking, well, I'm not a business podcast. I'm, more of an entertainment podcast. A lot of podcasters are storytellers, and they're so good at it, most of them. And most of us, and that's why even without thinking about any of this stuff, we're doing it naturally anyway. Like think about some other friends of ours, the Tennis podcast. They tell stories constantly. They just put out this little clip on Twitter he was making fun of his co-host because he tucks his shirt in to his jeans, and that is funny. And comedians are so good at these funny stories. And then they talk about,
they said the scene.
So there's all sorts of ways you can use any one of these. And that you could use a why, a how, and you can start your episode off with a why and then drift into, well, I've been there, and then finish it up with a success story, all within the same episode. So each episode could be a little why. This is why we decided to talk about this topic. So I was struggling with this, and he was making fun of me, or she was giving me a hard time, or my boss. Don't you just hate it when your boss says this to you? Well, that's why we've decided for our topic to be this. Or so the whole idea is to just kind of stop yourself in the creative process to say, like, obviously we're all telling stories. So are we using intention and structure directed towards our listeners' pain points, or what it is they want to be entertained by? And how can we do that? And a lot of times it's simply just implementing some small things, into the process.
And then another thing is that the entire podcast episode doesn't need to be a story. You can start with a story so you can grab the attention of your audience from the beginning, and then you move on to the educational part, which is related to the story. So going back to the let's say the financial podcast, you can just at the top of my head start with somebody telling the story of somebody who didn't have the expertise or the knowledge about the stock market, and they invested in the stock market and things didn't go well, and you walk through like how this person just lost his life savings or the school savings for the kids, or very painful stuff that would come with losing your life savings. And then you go to the educational part of it, which would be, these are the things that you need to take into account before investing in the stock market.
Yeah, how to avoid that pain. Which is perfect, because you're playing on people's pain points and fears of losing all their money.
Or losing all their money.
And then another technique you could do also with that, I think that's a wonderful example, is you could also say, at the end of the episode, I'll tell you what happened to this person. But first, let's talk about how to avoid that. And then they have to wait till the end of the episode to hear what happened to that story you started, because people really want to hear the end of the stories.
Yeah. And then it makes it, sometimes we'll listen to things and we don't get anything out of what we'll listen to. But if something, we're going to remember that story, and we're going to remember what things that we learn associated with the story, because once again, our brains, they learn better with stories.
Yes.
It's proven.
And that's
the oxytocin that I explained in my video.
Yeah, in a nice video that you should check out on YouTube. It's oxytocin, damn it. So I hope that was a lot of helpful information for you guys.
Yes.
And I hope also, this is something that has come to us from a client who is worried about his informational content being bland or boring. He wanted to spice it up. And storytelling is not a new thing by any means in marketing or anything. It's always, we all know the importance of it. So hopefully you can use this. And if you're already telling stories, maybe you can find ways to add more tension, make the stakes higher. Just like Robert McKee said, the higher the stakes, the more we learn about the character and the more invested in the story we are.
Yeah.
And before we say goodbye for this week, I'd just like to tell you about our Overachievers Club over on Patreon.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Overachievers Club, because we already told you our why, and we already told you why we show up every week with interesting and educational stuff for you. But we need your support. We need your support to keep the doors of the Pod Sound School open. And we need your support so we can keep doing what we love to do, which is researching and learning and teaching you all the ins and outs and teaching you everything about having a successful podcast. So if you want to support us, if you like what we do, join us on Patreon. There's a little clip there about my story and where I'm coming from Cali, if you're interested. To know, I have a story to tell.
Where she grew up there. So we have that story there, and we're going to constantly be posting stuff over there.
We have the behind the scenes of how we shoot our YouTube videos. We have, what else do we have?
Well, we have a unique RSS link that we're going to be adding more episodes to as our patrons ask us. And then we also have a goal over there as well.
We do.
To expand the Pod Sound School to Pod Sound School Español.
Yes.
And that whenever I speak in Spanish, I have to speak like this.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I don't know why either, but
I think it's offensive.
I think it's very offensive too. It comes from the theme parks where they tell you to keep your hands and legs inside.
Oh yeah,
it's that voice, you know.
Yeah.
Keep your manos inside the thing at all times.
Keep your manos. Anyway, so if you want to support us and support us on our goal to bring the Pod Sound School to the Latin Spanish-speaking
Latin America,
countries
and Central America. We want to bring resources there because and help them with the know-how. Podcasting's on the rise.
So we have how many Patreons?
Right now, I think we have 6 or 7.
And what's the goal?
We want 2,000.
We want 2,000. So please, we need 1,990 ish.
Because one of our patrons is Veronica. So
yes.
But it's been really fun. We really love doing these Twitter lives.
Yeah,
and,
we do.
This is really fun for us. Also, come check us out on Facebook at our Facebook group. Podcasting for Bosses. And there we do a weekly Facebook Live there too, which is totally directed towards the group members.
Yes.
And
it's just a way to reach out to us and ask us questions.
And then
it's
also
an open forum for you to
meet
be in contact with other podcasters.
Yeah. And more people are joining every day. There's podcasters from all different genres in there.
Yes.
There's more business-minded podcasts that are about generating income from their podcasts. But then there's also podcasters that are just entertainment podcasts doing it for fun.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good information just by asking the group members over there. So yeah, until next time, until next week, happy casting, people.
Bye, friends.
Pod Show.